How many surahs are there in the Quran? That depends on which Quran we go to. Muhammad's companion Abdullah ibn Masud only had 111 surahs in his Quran. Muhammad's companion Ubay ibn Ka'b had 116 surahs in his Quran. The Quran that Muslims use today is descended from the one that was put together by Zayd ibn Thabit, and the Zayd ibn Thabit edition had 114 surahs. But there's only one Quran, right? So, 111 equals 114 equals 116 in Islam? That's weird. Things get more interesting when we think about the nature of those surahs. What is a surah of the Quran? What is Surah 2, for instance? What is its nature? You Muslims will say that its nature is the Quran or that it's the speech of Allah. So, different surahs of the Quran share that same nature, don't they? They all share the same nature as the eternal speech of Allah, don't they? Okay, let's think about this. Is Surah 1 identical to Surah 2? Is Surah 2 identical to Surah 3? Surah 1 is distinct from Surah 2, isn't it? Surah 2 is distinct from Surah 3, isn't it? And yet, their nature, what they are, is the same, because they're all the Quran, or the speech of Allah. So, Surah 1 is the Quran. Surah 2 is the Quran. Surah 3 is the Quran. But Surah 1 is not Surah 2. Surah 2 is not Surah 3. Surah 3 is not Surah 1. You Christians who are watching may recognize this as an illustration of the concept of the Trinity. The Father is God, the Son is God, the Holy Spirit is God. But the Father is not the Son is not the Holy Spirit is not the Father. Our Muslim friends tell us that this is impossible, and yet we can use the same illustration for the Quran. The only difference is that if we wanted to be accurate, we'd need a figure with 114 sides, and there's no way I'm drawing that. Way too complicated. Now, if each of the 114 surahs is the Quran, are there 114 Qurans? I thought there was only one Quran. It seems that Muslims believe that the Quran is one in essence or nature, but 114 in surah or chapter. The Quran is one in one way, but more than one in another way. But with all the Muslim mockery of the Trinity, I thought it was impossible to be one in one way, but more than one in another way. What about the 7 ahruf? According to Muhammad, the Quran was revealed in 7 ahruf, 7 different modes or forms. Muslims today claim that this simply refers to different dialects, but there's no way this is just different dialects because people who spoke the same dialect were reciting different ahruf. What are the different ahruf? Sad story. No one knows. But whatever the 7 different modes or forms are, there's only one Quran, right? So the Quran is one in essence or being or nature, but 7 in mode or form. What about the 10 official qira'at, the 10 different recitations or readings of the Quran? The different qira'at contain different Arabic letters and different Arabic words, and this led to differences in the text of the Quran in different parts of the world.
Today, most Muslims read the Quran in a text that is referred to as the Egyptian edition of 1924 to Muslims in general. This is just simply the Quran. But this is not the only text of the Quran that is read throughout the world.
In other words, if you were to compare 2 printed Qurans, you're going to see differences between them. And when we say the various different ways to recite the Quran, we are not talking about different voices or different styles. We're talking about slight differences in pronunciations, slight differences in letters, slight differences in harakat.
In North Africa, there is a slightly different text that is based on a slightly different reading. And then too, in some parts of Africa, there is another reading of the Quran and a matching manuscript that is prevalent.
They recite the Quran in a slightly different way, not just a voice or not just a speaking style, but also changes in letters and words and harakat.
Sometimes the different words give the verses different meanings. Sometimes the different words lead to contradictory meanings. Gets even worse because there are multiple versions of the different qira'at. And yet there's only one Quran, right? So, the 10 different qira'at with different Arabic letters and different Arabic words and different meanings are somehow only one Quran, aren't they? And each of these readings really is the Quran, isn't it? Let's consider 3 different versions. The Hafs version is the Quran. The Warsh version is the Quran. The Al-Duri version is the Quran. But the Hafs version isn't the Warsh version. The Warsh version isn't the Al-Duri version. The Al-Duri version isn't the Hafs version. And yet, there's only one Quran. So, the Quran is 1 in essence, 7 in ahruf, 10 in qira'at, and 114 in surah. Hence, according to Islam, 1 equals 7 equals 10 equals 114. Here our Muslim friends might object, but David, we're only raising this objection because you say that there are 3 persons in the Trinity. It's impossible for 3 persons to be one in essence or nature. Is it now? Let's see if your prophet agrees with you. In Sahih Muslim 1874, Muhammad tells his followers, "Recite the Quran, for it will come on the day of resurrection, interceding for its companions. Recite the 2 bright ones, Surat al-Baqarah and Surat al-Imran, for they will come on the day of resurrection as if they were 2 clouds, or as if they were 2 shadows, or as if they were 2 flocks of birds in ranks, pleading on behalf of their companions." Notice, it will come, the Quran will come, interceding for its companions. But individual surahs will also come as flocks of birds pleading on behalf of Muslims. So, the Quran as a whole intercedes, but individual surahs also intercede. They speak, they intercede, they plead. Other surahs of the Quran will intercede as well. In Sunan Abu Dawud 1400, Muhammad says that another surah of the Quran, Surah 67, will intercede on behalf of its companion until he is forgiven. Since Muhammad tells us that multiple surahs of the Quran act as personal agents, I think it's safe to conclude that all of the surahs of the Quran act as personal agents, unless our Muslim friends want to convince us that some surahs are personal agents while others aren't, which would suggest that different surahs actually have different natures. But notice, if all of the surahs of the Quran act as personal agents, speaking and interceding and pleading, then there are 114 personal agents within the Quran, and yet the Quran also acts as a single personal agent. Sunan Ibn Majah 3781. The Quran will come on the day of resurrection like a pale man, and will say, "I am the one that kept you awake at night and made you thirsty during the day." According to Muhammad, there are 114 personal agents in the Quran. They speak, they intercede, they plead. But the Quran appears as a single pale man, a single personal agent. 114 persons in a single pale man? That's got to be a record. So, here again, 114 equals 1 in Islam. Try to get your mind around this. Allah's speech is eternal. That eternal speech is also personal. It appears as a man, speaking and interceding. But within the one nature of that eternal personal speech, there are 114 personal agents that speak and intercede and plead. Now, let me ask all my Muslim friends out there, what was your objection to the mathematics of the Trinity? Why do you keep saying that the Trinity is irrational and absurd? What was your objection to the claim of Jesus and the apostles and the prophets that God is one in one way, but more than one in another way? If you insist, as you keep doing, that the doctrine of the Trinity must be rejected because it leads to mathematical absurdities, well then, we have no choice but to reject your God, your prophet, and your book for producing so many mathematical absurdities. Tell me, why is it that the absolute dumbest objections to Christianity, 1 + 1 + 1 = 1 in Trinity, become the most popular Muslim objections to Christianity? Do you really want to know, my Muslim friends? It's because you serve the single most obvious false prophet in history. And that 7th century Arabian caravan robber you call your prophet contradicts the teachings of the most indisputably reliable and trustworthy and miraculous person in history, Jesus Christ. Your scholars and apologists don't want you thinking about the unmistakable differences between Jesus and Muhammad. So they fill your heads with laughably stupid objections to Christianity, along with lies about your prophet, to keep you distracted. Your creator, the creator of the universe, revealed something about his eternal nature. He revealed it through Jesus Christ, the apostles, and the true prophets. And you mock what he revealed, because you'd rather believe the most obvious false prophet in history, and the scholars and dawagandists who constantly lie to you to keep you in a state of ignorance. If you still don't believe me when I tell you that your scholars and dawagandists are trying to keep you in a state of ignorance, just ask yourself, why is it that most of the information David just shared with me in this video is information that I will only hear from David and maybe from some other Christians or a few atheists, but never from Muslim scholars and apologists, even though it comes from Islam's most trusted sources? If your scholars and apologists are hiding this from you, what else are they hiding?